In 1928, when presidential hopeful in the United States, Herbert Hoover, he promised citizens a chicken in every pot. In a similar move, Mmusi Maimane of Build One South Africa is promising South Africans a job in every home. That's the promise of his party. And they're looking, like many parties, are looking at a dire unemployment rate. And it's easy to see why job creation is the cornerstone of many of political parties' manifestos. But just how do they do that? Mmusi Maimane, thanks so much for joining us. Some political parties are saying 2 million jobs in 5 years. Other political parties are saying 5 million jobs in 5 years. We spoke to a smaller political party last week who promised 75,000 jobs a month. How are they going to do that? They don't quite know. What's Bosa offering? How many jobs are you creating in 5 years?
Good morning, and it's always great to be in studio with you. Great to be here in Cape Town. And before maybe getting on to that, I want to just say to all the firefighters who are involved with the fire on Table Mountain, I wish them strength and great success. It's one of these winter hazards that we've always got to keep up with, and I just send them my thoughts and prayers and courage there. We were the first to come out to say what is feasible is actually doing about 2 million jobs in the next 5 years. And of course, that's still not enough to achieve the dream of full employment. When I talk about a job in every home, we've worked out that, in fact, about 40% of our households don't have a single person working in it, so they wholly reliant on welfare and dependent on remittances, which creates this asymmetry or South Africa of two halves. In fact, a South Africa where there are some households that have got more people working, and then you've got some households that got no one working. So if we want this country to prosper, to build one South Africa, we have to ensure at least in every household there is a person working, because it's not just about the job, it's about dignity, it's about income into the house. And practically, there are two major focuses. One is on a macroeconomic policy that focuses on growth, and that's about ensuring the lights do stay on. And we've spoken about SMRs to keep Eskom stable and so that we have baseload. We've spoken about logistics, which is about making sure that goods can arrive at ports and move into the country, and that citizens can move. I mean, when I think about Cape Town, the passenger rail system must ensure that people are not spending 40% of their income trying to get to work, whereas we can do that with trains. We have to skill our young people. That's about making sure that our education systems don't deliver kids who drop out at grade 9 or pass at 30%, but that these are young people who can compete. And we have to keep our communities safe. When you think about communities, particularly in high violent areas, Nyanga being a good example, you think about Cape Town being the murder rate being high there, no investment is going to go into such spaces. So that's on the one macroeconomic condition, and we've spoken about devolving some of the policing so that we can fight that. On the micro, this is about ensuring that we've put aside a 220 billion rands investment into township economies. I don't see why it shouldn't be possible that in Guguletu there's a call center that works from there that can employ people. Secondly, as an example, when I look at manufacturing output, South Africa, technologies around even kettle making and microwave making, we only manufacture 4% of those. I mean, it's unbelievable that such an old technology and such a used commodity we couldn't be manufacturing here in South Africa. And so we need to be able to roll out manufacturing. Cape Town is blessed with an incredible tourism sector, and therefore it becomes a massive opportunity for us to increase the volume of people by coming here, by easing up the regulatory burden and making sure tourists are safe and travel through the city. And then lastly, we've spoken about a national civilian service. That's about introducing a 1-year program upon which young people who finish school can spend 6 months internship and 6 months working. So we think a combination of those factors, a growing economy, conditions that are correct, stimulus on micro enterprise and macro, so that people are actually creating job delivering work prospects, and the link between GDP growth and job creation becomes the absolute pathway towards being able to achieve, not at a base 2 million jobs, but more than that.
What's your thoughts on the efficacy of an EPWP program, which is not a full-time job, but it is an opportunity in our current circumstance to put food on the table. A model that has worked so well that it's even being studied by countries like Portugal and Italy, with also increasing levels of youth unemployment.
Yeah, it's a historical model of being able to achieve quick, short-term job opportunities, particularly for unemployed South Africans. What I've argued for is that what the current government does on the Extended Public Works Program is that it sets a threshold at 35. So, which means that often people over that don't always qualify easily for those. And I've made the case to say, in our communities, if we're going to focus on homes, let the homes determine who can work, so that if you've got a home where you've got someone over the age of 35 or no one under the age of 35, let's get them to get working, because that's important. Furthermore, I think extended public works programs also can be linked almost deliberately when you build infrastructure. I think that one of the things that we haven't seen in South Africa is a mass rollout of infrastructure, particularly in communities that historically have not had. So we've got to be able to do that intentionally and link the communities to EPW, to those infrastructure programs over the long-term period. And then lastly, I do think it must have a skills component to it, so that you certify what people have learned. If you are building a road, if you are bricklaying, if you are doing all of that, that is a skill you are learning that should mean that the opportunity can be translated into long-term work. So I'm very keen at when we manage these programs, make sure that we certify, we skill people, but some of it, particularly around grant programs, etc., give people the skill. Because when I speak to South Africans, they welcome the intervention of grants because people are poor. No one wants to go to bed hungry. But what people actually want beyond the grant is to be able to work. So when we've spoken about even a basic income grant, I've said it cannot be conditional to the idea of you finding a job. Actually, I want you to find a job and still be able to retain your basic income grant, because it becomes important for you to move ahead in life and not feel like getting a job is a disincentive.
Please ask Mmusi what he considers to be a job, a J-O-B, i.e. would a minimum wage job be a job or a contract-based job?
No, I think that living wage is an important issue. In this country, median wage is sitting just over, I think it's 3,800 was the last. And therefore, what we've got to do is ensure that South Africans are earning more than that, because in all fairness, so I don't subscribe to the thinking that says we must eradicate minimum wage, because I think that given the high levels of inflation in this country, given the history of labor practice, I think it's important that South Africans are able to get over a living wage, and therefore I'd seek out the best ways to try and increase that. But it's not dealing to the idea of productivity. So you can't just increase wages all across the system without seeking out ways of being able to assess whether the employer is productive, etc., etc. So I do think the combination of both those things are important. And then permanent work requires that someone must be employed over a full-time period over a year. So I would argue that that's one of the things we've got to do. And I'm very passionate about SMMEs. And one of the things I did when I left Parliament is went and spent time in the private sector to look at how we stimulate SMMEs. And so we've got to get behind our entrepreneurs. So it's not just macroeconomic employment, it's also about SMME culture and making sure that those businesses, anyone who's running a coffee shop, I know very close friends of mine who have just opened a coffee shop, and part of it is about making sure that the regulatory burden is taken away from them. They can be able to meet their financial obligations, but then drive forward to a growth culture.
A big focus of not just your campaign, because there was a period when you were not a politician, you were not running for anything, but you were still campaigning in terms of lobbying. And a large focus of your lobbying has been around education reform, whether it is about replacing life orientation, which I completely disagree with, because life orientation encompasses a little bit of civic education, and I just have to listen to the discourse around me and I then realize and confirm with myself, yes, we still need LO and civics in this country, Mmusi.
No. I mean, it's improving life orientation. You know, one of the untold stories, Lester, that of my life is that I actually taught for a little bit. And so one of the subjects that I could teach was life orientation. And I know what we did. We spent a lot of time just, it was one of those subjects kids didn't even take seriously. You'd have to get an assessment criteria where some of it was sport and health, and then you had to introduce a number of things. I think we could have been better at introducing critical reasoning and critical thinking as part of the skill orientation that we put in there. And furthermore, ensuring that, to your point about civic education, that we give young people an opportunity to understand what constitutional democracy looks like and in the long run. But that's not just the only reform in education. One of the things I've proposed is that, like me and many other South Africans, you would stand on the highway outside any township and see tons of kids leaving to find education elsewhere. And I think if we introduced a voucher system that allows for collaborative education in communities, this way we build high caliber public and private schools, a partnership of both. The state provides the land, the infrastructure, the private sector provides the educational competence, etc. And we put together a voucher that we give to parents. What parents then can use that voucher is compete for which are the best schools, because then you up the leadership caliber. Furthermore, I think principals should no longer be appointed by unions, as we saw in the Jobs for Cash report. We need to free up the best leaders in schools, because what we know from research is that actually the best principal is able to deliver better educational outcomes. I've campaigned hard to say we need to stop asking kids to be proficient in a subject at 30%. I think it's a mess. No one is proficient at 30%, to be fair. We need to up that to 50%. What that does is that it forces the teacher to compete. And on the pipeline of any learner in this country, let's be clear that from birth, let's deal with the first 1,000 days so that brain functioning is improved and not hampered by children who are malnourished and are not eating in those first 1,000 days. Let's incentivize primary school education so that teachers, we don't have the stat that 8 out of 10 of our children cannot read for meaning by the age of 10. We've got to improve primary school education. And more, lastly, I do think over a long period of time, I'm passionate about maths and science because I think the economy that's going forward is going to be digital. And if we don't give our young people that option, we're going to have a problem. So part of it is, when you look at it even statistically, the kids who started school in 2012, 1.2 million of them, actually only over 27% of them passed mathematics at 50%. So it tells you a story of kids starting school not doing maths at the most competent level, which means that actually we're going to have a generation of kids or young people who upon finishing school are not proficient in mathematics, which leaves them not to be competitive.
But you've also criticized the grade 9, what's being called the grade 9 school leaving certificate. It's not a school leaving certificate. It is a recognition that you can then go to a educational institution saying that I already have points in terms of a national qualification. It would equal 1 point. You've also spoken out against it, saying it leaves a bad impression that you could leave school at the end of grade 9.
Yeah, it's Bantu education. And I'll tell you why that is. 2 out of 3 young people cannot find jobs in this country. The 90% of those young people who cannot find jobs, many of them don't have a matric. In quintile 1, 2, and 3, which are the poor schools, right? So no fee paying schools, the dropout rates there are higher. So I don't think you and I, or South Africans who in some way send their kids to quintile 5 schools or high fee paying schools and private institutions, are going to be comfortable with a child who comes out with a grade 9 certification as part of their application process. No one's going to do that. So you fulfill this notion that firstly, townships become dormitories of unemployment. Secondly, the skills base at grade 9, I would not hire a grade 9. It just would not do it, because what skill are they bringing into the economy that I can use? We, rather than making it ambitious to reward someone at grade 9, let's push for better matric pass rates. And that's why I get super frustrated at the end of every year. It ruins my Christmas and the start of every year when I listen to the Minister of Education self-congratulate herself on these fantastic matric results and say, we got an 81% pass mark. It's absolute nonsense. It's a mask. And then the president repeats the same lie to South Africans, whilst in fact, 40% of those kids never wrote matric. The quality of the matric means that just over only less than, or just over 40% of them are going to actually qualify for university. We should be asking better. Young people who go to IEB schools get just closer to 90% university acceptance matriculation pass. Why can't we aspire for that? When you think about countries that have moved up the developmental curve, Japan, South Korea, who started off in a similar baseline as us 30 years ago, today have outstripped us by far. Those economies have done so by educating their young people, making sure that the quality of their outputs is significant. Because out of that pool, you build a very competent civil service, you have better conversations as a society because of what your developmental challenges are, and your economy is able to transition on the back of a skills revolution.
Plenty of discussion over the course of this electoral cycle is, should public reps be compelled to use public services, including education, healthcare? Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's important for public representatives to do that. I certainly think that it forces them to fight. For example, as a family, we've kept our kids in public education. You also think it's important that when I think about healthcare and how I view it, is that it's always a combination of both public and private. That's why I'm not always a keen endorser of the government's view on national health insurance. I think citizens must be able to exercise choice, and that would be true in healthcare for public representatives. They must be able to exercise the same choice. Like, for example, I happen to think fundamentally, if you are poor and you are living in a township, let's talk about healthcare for 1 second. And for example, here in the Western Cape, a school like a hospital like Groote has got an incredible hepatology department, which means that actually all of the people who are looking for liver specialists need to be able to go there, both public and private, and what the state does is underwrites that and pays for that facility. But when it comes to primary health care, and you find that you've got a common cold or all of that, at that level, you may find there isn't a clinic close by to you that works. Go to whatever the private doctor there is and let the state underwrite that. So it's a combination of both public and private.
You're going to a private GP and you're paying 500 Rand for a consult for a working family in South Africa. During a winter season, you have 2 or 3 kids who will get sick, and that is, and I'm speaking from experience. Yeah.
Same, yeah. I don't think.
And you have to pay private medical aid rates simply to get the most basic of medication.
Yeah, and I think we could be able to allow to stimulate public healthcare by allowing the state to be an underwriter, but also private healthcare in those communities to make sure citizens can go there. And like I share the sympathy. Someone once said to me, there's only 3 weeks in the year where a family of 3 kids like mine, everyone is healthy all at the same time, because in truth, as they go to nursery school, all of those things, everyone is getting sick.
Without giving your address, where's home, Mmusi?
I live at the airport, actually, to be more. No, I travel here. My home is here in Cape Town. My kids go to schools here, but we have a home in Johannesburg, and I get the privilege of being able to commute between the two and see this country.
Okay. So based on the way the different metros are on Cape Town and Johannesburg, where would you prefer your children to be raised, the city of Cape Town or the city of Johannesburg?
To tell you the honest truth, I love Johannesburg for its diversity and its inclusion. Funny enough, maybe this is not a city competence necessarily. I think that one of the things that the city of Cape Town has at least been able to do is that the quality of public education has been very good. And I think that's important. That's a competence of the province relative to what happens nationally. But there's an energy between that. I love both cities in that sense. I long for Johannesburg, but I don't lament living in
So if that is based on the way a province is governed, how do you, as a political campaigner for a party that's campaigning against the current government here in the Western Cape, how do you square that if your life is particularly find it better here than in other parts of the country?
I said maybe the school our kids go to is better. I didn't necessarily think that all the governance indicators are such, because I think one of the greatest difficulties here in Cape Town that I wake up to every day is the fact that Cape Town is 2 cities. if you live in an urban high LSM community, the services are brilliant in some ways. You go to poor communities. I'll take you to Kailicha, Kukule, Tulanga. You'll soon discover the fact that the roads infrastructure is poor. You'll discover very quickly that, in fact, crime levels are increasing. Very quickly, you'll discover that unemployment there is quite high. So a combination of both those things creates a problem. Let me give you one emblematic thing that all of us who live in Cape Town see all the time. You take the highway going into work. There is a bus lane that allows you to go into work because that's quicker, because it's important for people to get to work. There isn't one going home, though, which we must ask the question, why is that? Why is it not important for families in Kailicha and Kukule to also be able to get home and be in time for their kids? Why do we have to keep that symbolic sense of townships are labor sending communities for people to come and work in the city, but then when they have to go home, it's irrelevant what time they get home? These are issues of justice that we have to fight for. And I certainly, when I sit here today, whilst having worked in the city of Cape Town, having worked in Johannesburg, do fight hard that when I talk about building one South Africa, that we've got to be fully committed to make sure those communities prosper if we're going to have shared prosperity in this country. We fail at that task, there should be no peace in this country.
Should more political parties be realistic? Manifestos are a collection of aspirations that if we were to govern outright, these are the policies that we will implement. Many political parties, currently there's only one, even that may not even be realistic, that has the history of governing outright. So party manifestos is a book of aspirations. Should political parties, newer political parties, rather not just speak to the aspirations that if we were to co-govern with another entity, where there'd be compromises that would need to be made, this is what we're offering. So it's also a question of who would you be willing to work with to get as close to your manifesto aspirations?
I think that's a very important point. What manifestos give is a sense of what you would do over a long period of time. We tabled a 10-point plan, and in that 10-point plan, we raise issues of how we deal with ESCOM, how we deal with Transnet, how we keep communities safe. In fact, I haven't tabled a manifesto. You might call it a manifesto, but you were very clear in front of you there's a jobs plan. We focus on data provision, broadband allocation. We've looked at how we deal with safety. We've looked at how we would deal with the housing crisis through a voucher mechanism, the education improvement things. So on the basis of those 10 points, you then can negotiate. Rather than sitting here today and saying to people, okay, we will ideologically find each other here or that. That's not my plan. I've said 10 points, and then we'll put those to whatever party we work with, because I've been very realistic at saying, actually, a coalition is a good thing for this country. Actually, no party being able to get just an over majority in a proportional representative system as we have it now has led us to one party dominance, which has led us to state capture. So what I'd rather see happen, and it's true for parties, I've seen it. I've seen the evidence both here in the Western Cape and in other places. So it's true. So what we've got to do is bring a coalition government that allows for interaction and challenging of ideas. And then on the basis of that 10-point plan, I am saying to parties, either we can coalesce on this and work our way forward. Because if we can't agree on a plan, then the plan can't just be, let's just remove the current government and hope for the best. The worst thing we could do coming towards 2024 after that is to be able to govern and govern worse than the ANC. So what I'm proposing is that a grand coalition of the opposition working together on a 10-point plan, a cabinet of the best skills from various parties, a leadership that is ethical, that we can trust, and a state that is competent. Because when you achieve those things, we can be able to bring about the sort of governance that will mean South Africa must be better than what it's been now.
So are you saying yours is a platform of ABT, ANC, anyone but the ANC? You are willing to work with coalition, with opposition parties in a grand coalition that doesn't include the ANC?
Absolutely. And it's not out of a hatred of the ANC. I think that the ANC, they talk about renewal. I think you can only renew when you're on the bench. Let them go sit down for a while. Figure out what's going on inside that organization. And then all of us, as South Africans, need to build this grand coalition of the opposition with ethical leadership, with an eradication of corruption, building of a competent state, And like I said, a cabinet that works. Because when we work on a plan, we can be able to achieve it. And I certainly think that whilst for many South Africans that might present a fear, because they think that, well, it might bring chaos, etc. I think it represents a hope. Cape Town would not be where it is unless it was a 7-party coalition. So in this election, actually it's not about voting for the old parties, it's about voting for the new, because they will hold the balance of power. Choose who you want in the room to negotiate. And as it happens, we're finding in our polls that we're polling highest here in the Western Cape, which is a very positive thing.
Mmusi Maimane, unfortunately, that's all the time we have. I would have wanted to ask you a bit more of your graying beard. Since the last time I saw, the campaign trail must be tough.
Gunzi. it's lit out there.